In a land of dust and drought, where kings rise and fall and prophets walk with the fire of God upon their lips, there lived a woman whose name was never recorded, yet her story would echo through eternity. She was no queen, no warrior, no prophet, just a woman in Shunem, wealthy, wise, and quietly generous. Her act of kindness would unlock a miracle and later test her faith in ways she could never imagine. This is the story of the Shunammite woman and her son, the story of hospitality that invited heaven into her home, and a God who turns selfless acts into eternal blessings. Have you ever wondered how a single act of kindness can change the entire course of someone's life, and even generations to come? Sometimes the smallest gesture, given without expectation, sets off a chain of divine events that no human could ever orchestrate. Imagine living in a time when prophets walked the earth, carrying messages straight from the throne of God. They weren't just men, they were vessels of divine authority, feared, respected, and often misunderstood. To host such a person was not just an honor, but a sacred opportunity. This is the story of one remarkable woman. Her name, never mentioned in the text. Yet, her legacy echoes through Scripture, immortalized not by her wealth, beauty, or social status, but by something far more profound, her heart of generosity. She was simply called the Shunammite woman. Her decision to extend hospitality to a weary prophet opened the door to blessings so unimaginable they defied human logic. But as we will soon see, her journey was not without tests. Tests that would reveal the depth of her faith and the true nature of divine favor. So, let's step back in time, into the warm plains of Shunem, into a home where generosity will become a gateway to a miracle that still speaks to us today. The town of Shunem was a small village in the northern territory of Israel, located in the fertile Jezreel Valley. This was an agricultural hub. Fields of barley and wheat stretching across the land, kissed by the sun and watered by the seasonal rains. Life here was simple yet demanding, anchored in the rhythms of planting, harvesting, and family life. In those days, hospitality was not optional. It was a moral duty. A traveler seeking food, water, or shelter was considered a sacred trust. To turn someone away was to bring shame upon your household. But beyond duty, hospitality was also a gesture of honor, especially when extended to men of God. Enter Elisha, the prophet who succeeded Elijah. Known for his miracles, wisdom, and unwavering loyalty to God, Elisha often traveled across Israel performing mighty works, purifying water, multiplying oil for widows, and healing the sick. He was a man constantly on the move, and his journeys frequently brought him through Shunem. Now, picture this. Every time Elisha passed by, dusty and tired from the road, he found a familiar face welcoming him, a woman who noticed his needs and acted without hesitation. This is where the story begins. The Bible describes her simply, a great woman. But what does that mean? The Hebrew word used suggests she was a woman of wealth, influence, and status in her community. She had resources. She had respect. But above all, she had discernment, the ability to see beyond the surface. The scripture tells us in 2 Kings 4 verse 8, "And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread." She didn't just offer food out of duty. She urged him, almost compelled him, to stop by and refresh himself. This was more than casual kindness. It was intentional. She recognized something about this man. Perhaps it was his humility, his devotion, or the aura of divine purpose that followed him. Whatever it was, she decided to act. Every time Elisha came through town, her home became a sanctuary of rest, a place where the prophet could find nourishment for his body and peace for his soul. But soon, hospitality turned into vision. The woman said to her husband one day, "Behold now, I perceive that this is an holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed, and a table, and a stool, and a candlestick. And it shall be, when he cometh to us, that he shall turn in thither." 2 Kings 4 verses 9 to 10. This wasn't just about being polite. It was about creating space for the presence of God. She could have been content with giving him a meal whenever he passed by. But no, her heart went further. She wanted to build a permanent place for him in her home. Notice the simplicity of what she requested. a bed, a table, a stool, and a lamp. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to impress, just the essentials for rest and reflection. Her motivation? Pure. She wasn't asking for favors. She wasn't angling for political power. She wasn't thinking, if I treat this prophet well, maybe he'll bless me with riches or influence. No, her heart was selfless. She simply wanted to honor the man of God because she honored the God he served. And so, the room was built, a modest upper chamber, tucked away from the busyness of daily life, dedicated to a servant of the Most High. Pause for a moment and think about this. How many of us get with strings attached? How often do we do something for others, secretly hoping it will come back to us in some form, gratitude, recognition, or even reward? But here was a woman who gave without expectation. And that, my friend, is where the power of unexpected generosity lies. True generosity does not calculate returns. It flows freely from a heart of love, expecting nothing in return, yet often opens doors of blessings beyond imagination. The Shunammite woman didn't know it, but she was setting the stage for one of the most incredible miracles in the Old Testament. Her simple decision to feed a weary traveler, then build him a room, will become the very reason life will be spoken into her deepest longing. Before we continue, let's draw out a truth that's as relevant now as it was then. When you make room for the presence of God in your life, when you prioritize His kingdom over personal gain, God Himself fills the empty spaces with abundance. The Shunammite woman wasn't looking for a blessing. She was looking to be a blessing. And that difference between seeking and serving marks the line between ordinary and extraordinary faith. Every time Elisha came through Shunem, he rested in that upper chamber. It became a pattern, a rhythm of grace. But prophets are not blind. They see, they discern, they notice the sacrifices of others. One day, Elisha called his servant Gehazi and said, "You see all this kindness? This woman has gone out of her way for us. What can be done for her? Should we speak on her behalf to the king or to the commander of the army?" 2 Kings 4 verse 13. He wanted to bless her. He wanted to reciprocate. But the Shunammite woman surprised him with her answer, "I dwell among mine own people." In other words, I'm content. I don't need connections. I don't need favors. I have everything I need. What a heart posture. No hidden agenda. No ambition. Just quiet contentment. But Elisha wasn't done. He turned to Gehazi. What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi noticed something the prophet hadn't. She has no son, and her husband is old. There it was, the unspoken longing, the silent ache. In that culture, childlessness carried deep emotional and social weight. It wasn't just about legacy. It was about security, identity, and honor. And now, time was slipping away. Her husband was aging, and the hope of a child seemed buried in the dust of forgotten dreams. But the God who sees every hidden desire was about to write a new chapter in her story. What began as a simple meal would soon unfold into a divine visitation. Her generosity had opened a door, and through that door would walk a promise so audacious, it would shake the foundations of her faith. The Shunammite woman had given Elisha a room on her roof, but God was about to give her a son in her arms. Stay with me, because in the next segment, we'll see how the word of prophet turned into the miracle of a lifetime. But as we close this first part, let this truth echo in your heart. When you give without expectation, heaven takes notice. The sun blazed over Shunem, casting long shadows across golden fields ready for harvest. Merchants bustled in the marketplace, voices rising above the clamor of donkeys and wagons. Amid the activity stood a woman of substance, known in her town for her grace and wisdom. Though her name has faded from the scroll of time, her character shines brighter than gold. She was a Shunammite woman, a woman who understood the quiet power of kindness. Each season, as surely as the rain would fall and the grain would grow, a prophet passed through Shunem. His name was Elisha, the man of God, successor to Elijah, the one who would call fire from heaven. His presence was unlike anything else in the town. Calm, unwavering, and cloaked in the authority of the Almighty. The woman watched him from a distance at first. No trumpet announced his arrival. No caravan of riches followed him. Just a simple man with a mantle draped over his shoulders, a servant named Gehazi at his side, and dust on his sandals from miles of walking. But there was something about him, something holy. His words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were true. And the woman, though wealthy and comfortable in her home, felt a stirring in her heart, a desire to bless this man of God. One day, as Elisha passed by, the woman approached him with humility and grace. Her voice was steady, warm, and sincere. "Please, come and eat with us," she said. Just a simple invitation. No grand speeches, no elaborate promises. Just an open table and a willing heart. Elisha accepted, and that meal was the beginning of something divine. Each time he traveled through Shunem, he stopped by their home, breaking bread, resting his weary feet, and sharing words of wisdom that dripped like honey from the comb. The woman saw something others did not. This was not an ordinary guest. This was a messenger of God. In those quiet evenings, as oil lamps flickered against the clay walls, she must have noticed how tired he looked after his long journeys. Perhaps she saw him resting on a mat, his cloak doubled as a blanket, and in her heart, an idea began to take root. Elisha needed more than a meal. He needed a sanctuary. One evening, she turned to her husband. The house was still, save for the hum of crickets beyond the window. Her eyes shone with conviction as she spoke. "Look," she said, "I know that this man who often passes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room for him on the roof and put in a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us." The simplicity of her plan was its beauty. No marble floors, no golden furniture, just the essentials. A bed for rest, a table for study, a chair for comfort, and a lamp for light. It was not about luxury. It was about care. It was about creating space for God's servant to dwell in peace. Her husband agreed, and soon hammers rang against the wooden beams, and clay bricks rose to form a quiet chamber above their home. When the room was ready, it stood like a beacon of hospitality, modest, pure, and filled with the fragrance of generosity. When Elisha saw the room, gratitude welled within him like a spring. He lay on the bed they had prepared, the cool air sweeping across the rooftop. It was more than a room. It was a gesture of love, an offering to God himself. He turned to Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman." She came and stood before the man of God, her posture humble yet strong. Elisha's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of heaven's favor. "You have gone to all this trouble for us. Now what can be done for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or the commander of the army?" The woman smiled gently. She needed nothing. Her voice was firm, her contentment clear. "I live among my own people," she replied. She had no ambition for titles, no hunger for influence. Her gift was pure, a river flowing without expectation of return. But Elisha was not satisfied to leave her empty-handed. What could be done for her? He asked Gehazi after she left, and Gehazi answered with quiet insight. She has no son, and her husband is old. Elisha nodded, and once again the woman was called. She stood at the doorway, her hand perhaps clasped together, her heart steady but curious. Elisha looked at her with eyes that had seen the unseen and spoke words that would shake the silence. "About this time next year," he said, "you will hold a son in your arms." The woman's breath caught. A flicker of disbelief danced in her eyes. "No, my lord," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't mislead your servant, O man of God." Years of quiet longing, years of unspoken prayers, and now this promise? It was almost too much to hope for. But the word of the prophet was the word of God, and when God speaks, even barren ground bursts into bloom. The woman had built a room, just a small, humble room. She had opened her door and her heart to a weary traveler. And in return, heaven opened its storehouse and poured out a miracle that no gold could buy. The gift of life, the cry of a child, the laughter of motherhood reborn. What she didn't know was this: her story was not over. This child would not only bring joy, but also test the depth of her faith. Her act of kindness had set in motion a divine plan that would carry her from the mountaintop of hope to the valley of shadows and back again. What can we learn from this moment? That hospitality is not just a meal on a table or a bed in a room. It is an invitation for God to to step into our lives. It is a seed that, when sown with a pure heart, grows into blessings beyond imagination. The seasons passed, and the once empty home of the Shunammite woman now echoed with the sweet laughter of a child. The boy was everything his parents had ever hoped for, full of life, curiosity, and boundless energy. His birth was not just a blessing. It was a living testimony of God's favor. For years, the woman and her husband basked in the joy of parenthood. Every morning, the boy would run to the sunlit fields, his tiny feet leaving playful trails in the soft earth. His father, now older and slower, often watched him with a proud smile, leaning on his staff as workers harvested the crops. The boy was his father's joy, his mother's pride, and a living miracle in the eyes of everyone who knew the story. But sometimes, blessings come with unexpected trials. It was during one of those golden harvest days, when the sun blazed high in the sky, that the story took a heartbreaking turn. The boy had gone out to the fields, as usual, to be with his father and watch the workers. He loved the rhythm of the sickles and the songs of the laborers as they gathered the grain. But that day, something was different. Suddenly, the boy clutched his head with both hands and cried out in pain, his voice sharp and urgent, "My head! My head!" The father turned quickly, startled by the cry. He rushed to his son, his old heart pounding with fear. The boy was trembling, his small face contorted in agony. The father, helpless and panicked, called his servant. "Carry him to his mother." The servant scooped up the boy and ran toward the house, his tiny body limp in his arms. When the mother saw them coming, her heart sank. Something inside her knew this was not a small matter. She took the boy from the servant, holding him close, feeling the heat radiating from his little head. She sat down, cradling him in her arms, rocking gently, whispering comfort as if her words could drive away the pain. For hours, she held him close. Noon passed. The shadows grew longer. But then, the unthinkable happened. As the sun reached its peak, the boy gave a faint sigh, and then he was still. The Shunammite woman stared in disbelief. Her heart screamed, but no sound came from her lips. Her arms tightened around him, as if holding him tighter could keep his soul from slipping away. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not allow them to fall. Not yet. This was a child promised by God through his prophet. This was the gift she never asked for, but God gave anyway. How could this be the end? She sat there for a moment, silent and still, her mind racing. Grief wanted to take over, to crush her beneath its weight. But faith refused to let go. In that moment of unimaginable loss, the Shunammite woman made a decision that would forever mark her as a woman of extraordinary faith. Instead of wailing or running to her husband, instead of collapsing in despair, she carried her son to the very room she had built for profit. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavy with pain but driven by purpose. When she reached the chamber, she laid the boy on the prophet's bed. The same bed that once stood as a symbol of hospitality now became an altar of hope. She arranged him gently, almost reverently, smoothing his hair as though he were only sleeping. Then she turned and closed the door behind her. There was no time to waste. She would not tell her husband what had happened. Not yet. He was in the field, and she knew what he would say. Why trouble the prophet now? But she was determined. She would not settle for mourning. She would not accept this as a final word. The Shunammite woman went to her husband and said calmly, "Send me one of the servants and a donkey, so I can go quickly to the man of God and return." Her husband looked puzzled. Why go to him today? It's not the new moon or the Sabbath. But she gave the only answer her faith allowed. "It will be well." Did you catch that? Not "it is well," but "it will be well." Those words held a quiet defiance against death, a steadfast hope in the power of God. Her husband, perhaps still confused, said no more. A servant was brought, a donkey prepared, and with a firm hand, the woman mounted the animal and gave her command. "Lead on. Don't slow down for me unless I tell you." The road stretched long and rugged before her. Dust rose in clouds as the donkey trotted swiftly, urged on by the servant at her side. The wind whipped against her face, but she didn't care. Her eyes were fixed on one destination, Mount Carmel, the dwelling place of the man of God. Miles melted under the pounding hooves, and finally, the silhouette of Elisha appeared in the distance. The prophet was seated, perhaps meditating, when his servant Gehazi saw a figure approaching at speed. "Look," Gehazi said, shading his eyes against the sun. "The Shunammite woman." Elisha rose at once. "Run to meet her," he said to Gehazi. "Ask her, 'Are you well? Is your husband well? Is the child well?'" Gehazi ran to her and repeated the questions, but the woman only replied with those same steady words. "It is well." But it wasn't. Not yet. She would not pour out her soul to anyone but the prophet himself. When she reached Elisha, she fell at his feet, clutching him with the desperation of a mother whose hope hangs by a thread. Gehazi tried to push her away, but Elisha stopped him. "Leave her alone," the prophet said softly. "She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me." The woman lifted her tear-streaked face and cried, "Did I ask for a son, my Lord? Didn't I tell you, 'Don't raise my hopes'?" Her words pierced the air like arrows. They were not words of rebellion, but of raw honesty. Elisha understood at once. The boy, the miracle child, was gone. Without wasting a moment, Elisha turned to Gehazi. "Tuck your cloak into your belt. Take my staff in your hand and run. Don't greet anyone you meet. Lay my staff on the boy's face." Gehazi dashed off like the wind, clutching the prophet's staff. But the mother refused to move. Her hands clung to Elisha's feet as she declared, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." Her determination was unwavering. She had brought her grief to the source of the promise, and she would not leave without an answer. So Elisha rose and followed her. The journey back felt longer than ever, every step echoing the urgency of life and death. Ahead of them, Gehazi reached the house and did as instructed. He laid the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound, no stirring, no sign of life. He turned and ran to meet Elisha with the grim report. "The boy is not awakened." Imagine the weight of those words. For the mother, for Elisha, what must they have felt? Had the power of God failed? Was this the end of the story? No, this was not the end. This was the threshold of a miracle greater than anyone imagined. And that's where we pause, because what happens next will leave you in awe. A story that began with simple hospitality was now standing at the edge of divine power. Would the boy live again? Could faith pull him back from the clutches of death? Stay with me, because the answer will reveal not just the heart of God, but the reward of faith that refuses to let go. What do you do when your greatest blessing suddenly dies in your arms? Imagine holding the very miracle God gave you, the answer to prayer you never prayed, only to feel his tiny body grow cold. How do you respond? Do you crumble under the weight of grief, or do you run toward the source of life? Today, we step into the most heart-stopping chapter of the Shunammite woman's story, a moment where faith is tested, desperation drives action, and God reveals his ultimate power over life and death. For years, the Shunammite woman's life had been peaceful. Her son, the miraculous child promised by Elisha, had grown into a lively, bright-eyed boy. He filled her days with laughter, curiosity, and joy beyond words. Every giggle was a reminder of God's generosity. But one day, the sun rose on what seemed like an ordinary morning and set on a nightmare she could never have imagined. The boy went out to the fields where his father and the reapers worked under the blazing heat. The crops swayed in the wind, the air thick with dust, but the boy seemed fine, until suddenly he clutched his head and cried out, "My head, my head." Panic rippled through the field. The father, alarmed, ordered a servant to carry the boy back to his mother. The boy's limp frame was laid across her lap, his breathing shallow, his face pale. She held him close, whispering comfort, stroking his hair, praying silently. Hours passed. Then the unimaginable. The boy grew still. His chest stopped rising. His body, once so warm, felt heavy and lifeless. The Shunammite woman stared in stunned silence. The promise of God dead? The miracle she never asked for gone? The joy of her old age ripped away? Grief threatened to crush her, but instead of wailing or collapsing in despair, something remarkable happened. She rose with a fierce, unshakable resolve. She carried her lifeless son to the upper room. the prophet's room, the holy space she had built years ago in an act of selfless hospitality. Gently, she laid him on Elisha's bed, her hands trembling yet steady with determination. Closing the door behind her, she didn't call for mourners. She didn't break down in front of her husband. She didn't accept this as the end. Instead, she said something astonishing when her husband asked about the urgency of her journey. "It is well." 3 simple words. Not a denial of reality, but a declaration of faith. It is well. What kind of strength does it take to say that when your child lies dead upstairs? What kind of trust holds firm when everything screams hopelessness? The Shunammite woman didn't linger. She saddled a donkey and told her servant, "Do not slacken the pace unless I tell you." She was a woman on a mission, not to plead with neighbors, not to bargain with priests, but to find a man of God who represented the God who had given her this child. The road stretched long and dusty as she pressed toward Mount Carmel, where Elisha was. Her heart raced, grief clawed at her throat, but hope burned like fire in her soul. She refused to speak of death. She refused to bury her son. As she approached, Elisha's servant Gehazi saw her from a distance and hurried to meet her, asking, "Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child?" Again, her answer was steady, unyielding. "It is well." Was she lying? No. She was declaring what faith knew before sight could confirm. She clung to the God who makes a way where there is none. When she reached Elisha, the composure broke. She fell at his feet, clutching him in raw desperation. "Did I ask a son of my Lord? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" Her words pierced with pain. "I didn't ask for this blessing, and I can't bear to lose it." Elisha understood the gravity of the moment. This was no ordinary sorrow. This was warfare between life and death, faith and despair. Elisha sent Gehazi ahead with his staff to lay on the boy's face, but the mother refused to leave without the prophet himself. Her resolve was ironclad. "As the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, I will not leave you." So Elisha rose and followed her. When they entered the room, the scene was solemn. The boy lying cold and silent on the bed, where miracles once flowed. What happens next is one of the most tender and powerful resurrections in Scripture. Elisha shut the door, prayed to the Lord, and then stretched himself over the child. Mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. It was an intimate, desperate act of faith, a prophetic picture of God breathing life where there is none. The boy's flesh grew warm. Elisha paced the room, then repeated the act. Suddenly the child sneezed once, twice, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times and opened his eyes. 7 sneezes. Complete restoration. Life had triumphed over death. Elisha called the mother. She came in, saw her son alive, and fell at Elisha's feet in gratitude. Then she gathered the boy in her arms, holding the warm, breathing miracle that had returned from the brink of the grave. What does this story teach us? It's not just about a woman who showed kindness to a prophet. It's not just about a boy raised from the dead. It's about a faith that clung to God when everything fell apart. It's about the power of hospitality that opens doors to divine encounters. The Shunammite woman gave without expectation and received beyond imagination. She built a room for Elisha and gained a son. She trusted God in crisis and saw a resurrection. Her story echoes through the ages. What you make room for, God will fill. Generosity may look ordinary, but in the hands of God, it becomes extraordinary. Your act of kindness today could set the stage for a miracle tomorrow. In a world where everything feels transactional, where giving often comes with strings attached, the Shunammite woman challenges us to give freely, love deeply, and trust boldly. What room are you building for God in your life? What space are you creating for others without expecting anything in return? Hospitality is more than a meal or a guest room. It's a posture of the heart. It's saying, "I will make space for you." And when we do, we invite the presence of God into our lives in ways we can't predict. Because here's the truth. When generosity flows, miracles follow.